I know the guy. I know the way he negotiates.
When was the last time you spoke to the president? And as you diversify trade away from the U.S.?
Who cares? I mean, it's a detail. It's a detail. I spoke to him. I'll speak to him again when it matters.
Trump administration refuses to renew USMCA trade deal. When Mark Carney was campaigning, he told Canadians he could handle Donald Trump. He said he could get a deal, and he told Canadians that that deal would come by July of last year. Then in April, the 232 tariffs hit Canadian industry and the stakes rose dramatically. Everyone was looking to Carney to deliver the better deal that he promised. But here we are on July 1st of 2026, and instead of a deal, Canada is staring at yet another failure in Carney's track record. The only question now is, what is that failure going to cost? Let's take a look. Ladies and gentlemen, put out by the Globe and Mail, Trump administration refuses to renew USMCA trade deal. The Trump administration has refused to renew the United States-Mexico-Canada agreement, setting the stage for protected trade negotiations and continuing uncertainty for businesses. Dominic LeBlanc, minister responsible for Canada-U.S. trade, met virtually with the U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer and Mexican Economy Secretary Marcelo Ebrard on Wednesday morning for the 6-year review of the Continental Trade Pact. Mr. LeBlanc and Mr. Ebrard advocated extending the USMCA for another 16 years. Mr. Greer said Washington will not renew the deal. Quote, "The United States did not agree to renew the USMCA in its current form. As a result, the USMCA is not renewed," end quote, Mr. Greer said in a statement. Negotiations for the USMCA review began late and have so far progressed bilaterally, with Washington dealing with Mexico City and leaving Ottawa on the sidelines. The Mexicans and Americans have held 2 formal negotiating rounds and have scheduled a third for later this month. Canada's trade team, led by Mr. LeBlanc and Chief Negotiator Janice Charest, have met with Mr. Greer several times in recent months, but not begun formal negotiations about potential changes to the USMCA. Quote, "In this meeting, I reaffirmed Canada's unwavering support for the CUSMA and its renewal," end quote, Mr. LeBlanc said in a statement on Wednesday after the meeting with Mr. Greer and Mr. Ebrard. Washington wants Ottawa and Mexico City to change a number of domestic policies it believes disadvantage American companies. For Canada, this includes digital streaming regulations and how dairy quotas are allocated as part of the country's supply management system. It also includes measures the federal government and provinces have taken in response to U.S. tariffs, including new Buy Canadian policies and the removal of U.S. alcohol from many provincial liquor store shelves. The Trump administration is also pushing for tighter rules of origin, which define how much of a product must come from inside North America to get preferential tariff treatment, and more alignment from Canada and Mexico on external tariffs on China. So this is an interesting framing from the Globe and Mail, but not surprising. They're positioning this as, well, this is all Donald Trump's doing, and this is all the Americans doing. This is not surprising. It would be nice if they did just a little journalism once in a while, instead of, independent media having to do it all for them. As you may recall, because we've been following this along for the last couple of months, we've actually talked about the fact that it was Canada that first violated the USMCA. And we violated it with regard to access to our dairy market by the American dairy farmers. And it actually went to an arbitration and a review as set out in the USMCA, and Canada was actually found to be violating it. So this business that it's only the United States that is violating this doesn't fly. But this is what Canadians are led to believe. Now, it's also not surprising that the United States is still talking about access to the dairy market, because they really haven't had access to our dairy market. And they're accusing Canada of operating in bad faith. Well, can you blame them? And then Canada comes out with this digital services tax, which again is violating the USMCA. So then the United States comes out with these 232 tariffs, which Canada and the Globe and Mail try to proclaim that, well, that's violating the USMCA. Well, that's up for debate. Now, this is me being objective because I don't like the 232 tariffs because they're violating Canadian industry. However, there's a section in the USMCA where it actually says that you are allowed to implement tariffs if you declare what you're implementing them on to be a national security issue. And this is where the United States is saying, well, we're putting them on, aluminum and steel and this sort of thing, which they regard as a national security issue. They have an argument there. Whether you like it or not, they do have an argument. So for Canada just to say, we're completely innocent and we're this, harmless little country, and the United States are being big and bad and they're violating the USMCA, it's a bunch of malarkey, or unmitigated horsepucky, as Mr. Dan McTeague would say. Now, the other business about this is they're positioning this as, well, Canada came in and, we've been trying to negotiate and nothing's happened. And they're trying to position this as Canada has been, trying to be here all along. Well, I want to remind everybody of what Mark Carney said not too long ago.
When was the last time you spoke to the president? And as you diversify trade away from the U.S.?
Who cares? I mean, it's a detail. It's a detail. I spoke to him. I'll speak to him again when it matters.
This was in November, folks. November 23rd, 2025. This was about a month after, from what we've learned now, a month after they had a framework deal in place, and then all of a sudden, it was not there. This was after the Ford ad. This was after Melanie Joly bungled everything up. And this is where the Canadians pushed away the Americans. The Canadians did that. Mark Carney's people, they did that. So then he says, well, who cares? I'll talk to him when it matters. You'll talk to him when it matters. Well, let's fast forward to April 2026, at committee, when our own industry and business leaders were trying to tell the government how serious this was, that these 232 tariffs that were modified in early April of 2026, how serious this threat was to our industry.
We need the Canadian government to fight on our behalf. It's not going to happen here in Ottawa. It's going to happen in Washington. We need a timetable. We need to start to work together. Is this a 2 to 3 month plan? Is this a 6 month plan? Is this a 1 year plan? My answer would be different for each one of those scenarios. Because you have to admit and come up with the reality that what you're asking of us is to stand to the front line of a trade war with the United States. And we are the front line. As we prepare for this, we are preparing for the risk of our businesses. We're playing and gambling with the future of our employees, and we don't know really how long this is going to go. So you ask for what my answer is for what support. I ask you, tell us what the plan is, because you're asking us to toe the line right now, and we really don't know how long it's going to be. If you tell me it's July, we'll probably be okay. If you tell me it's going to go much longer than that, then we need to come up with some serious measures to be able to support these companies, because right now Canada and the United States, for all the reasons I put down, are the two ugly sisters. And what's leaving is never coming back. So I ask the question, how long do you want us to hold the line?
So that was Jonathan Azzopardi. He's the owner of Laval Tool Inc. And he was just one of the business leaders from the mold, tool, and die industry that came to committee to talk about what was going on. Because the Liberals weren't listening, and they weren't interested in listening. And Mark Carney still hasn't been to Windsor to visit these businesses. And why hasn't he been there? Because they're in Conservative ridings. This is how Mr. Carney seems to be operating here. As we heard, Marilyn Gladue is now pretty happy, because she's saying, well, this is great for me. It's great for me personally. And, it's great for people in my riding. So apparently, if you didn't vote for Mr. Carney, you don't count in Mark Carney's Canada. And I don't care who you are. I don't care what party you support. That should concern all Canadians. That Mr. Carney, while accusing the Conservatives of being divisive, is actually dividing Canada. He's saying, if you're a Liberal, you get preferential treatment. Everybody else, you don't get any treatment at all. That's the way he's operating. So they were pleading for any sort of plan, and they still don't know what the plan is. All the government did is come out and say, well, here's some loans that you'll have to pay interest on. So you can't afford the tariffs, but you can get a loan for the tariffs, and you'll have to pay interest on top of that, which makes it even more expensive. So this isn't a long-term actual fix. So then we sat down and we talked to some of these business owners while we were at the Canadian Association for Mold Makers and their annual general meeting. And we spoke to the executive director and asked her what they needed the government to do. So earlier on, I think Canadians were expecting some sort of trade deal to provide relief for the tariffs. That seems to be now almost irrelevant because now we're into CUSMA talks. Is that the next avenue that the association is hoping where they get this relief?
Yeah, so I mean, we still have our fingers crossed that something positive will come. We continue to advocate and raise attention to the industry, the importance of the industry, the importance of business with the U.S., and just the overall importance of the CUSMA agreement on both sides of the border. So it's not just beneficial to Canada, it's beneficial to the U.S. to have access to Canadian manufacturing.
Now, several of your members actually took a trip to Washington to advocate on behalf of the industry. What came out of that?
A lot of information. I would say maybe too much information. There was a lot of connections and people that we recommended to talk to. And as an association, that's something that we followed up with. So, talking with the U.S. Trade Representative Office, talking to Global Affairs Canada in Washington, and even having meetings with the U.S. Ambassador to Canada, Pete Hoekstra, just to communicate on that side of the border why we, should be doing business together.
Now, one of the messages that we've heard from Ambassador Hoekstra is the U.S. is waiting for Canada. Is that what you heard?
Yes. So that is exactly what we heard, is that the U.S. is ready to go to the table, and then they need Canada to come to the table as well to come to an agreement. And that on that side, they didn't feel that was happening. Without the CUSMA agreement, without a fair agreement with the United States, we will lose Canadian manufacturing.
That's from the executive director of that association. And that association, they deal with all of the mold makers in Canada. That's their job. So, they need a deal. Now, CUSMA, if you've been following Brian Lindley's coverage of this, he has this, really, really accurate, and there's been a lot of misinformation going around. So, they wouldn't have to even say anything about CUSMA or USMCA or whatever we want to call it. It's going to continue. And you review it now on a year-by-year basis. That's what this means, is, if we don't want to extend it, that means, if we did extend it, it would go for 16 years. Now that it's not being extended, now it goes to an annual review every single year. But here's the thing. No, the sky isn't falling because everything that was in the USMCA is still covered under the USMCA. The problem is these areas that are not protected by the USMCA. This is what the mold makers, this is what the die makers, and this is what the tool makers in Canada have been screaming about, justifiably, for the last 2 months. They need help. And they need help, and they were hoping they were going to get that help with a renegotiated USMCA to include some of the stuff in there, to get tariff relief. Or at the worst case, just so there's some sort of understood plan, so they can figure out how their business model needs to adapt. But they don't know that. Mark Carney has not been able to get a deal. Mark Carney hasn't really been there. The mold makers are hearing that. Ambassador Hoekstra had said that about a week ago on CTV. And again, as first reported here, the Mexicans have been seeing that as well. Remember this. So we reported on this a little while ago, and it says Canada was absent from the preparatory negotiations. Dominic LeBlanc, Canada's minister responsible for Canada-United States trade and intergovernmental affairs, has been absent from the preparatory negotiations to define the course of the USMCA. Current USMCA negotiations will be more difficult. Still no date set for Canada's integration. Hopefully tomorrow we will get Canada to participate. We would very much like, of course, for Canada to join the talks as soon as possible. We've made that clear, and it all depends on the discussions between both countries, Canada and the United States, to see how this will be resolved. So Canada's been missing in action. So for the Globe and Mail to just frame this as, well, Canada's been sidelined, and Canada hasn't, and the United States has just unilaterally decided this. Well, if we're not even willing to come to the table, and this is not just the US saying this, this is other parties saying this as well. And Canada's the only one that seems to be saying, well, it's the United States, it's their fault. What do you say to these business owners that have been counting on you to do what you can to get this done? Now we're going to go back to one clip. Back in May of 2025, right after the election. This is what Mark Carney was telling everybody.
Last point, the stronger we are at home, the more we have that plan, the stronger we're going to be negotiating with them, because that allows us to walk away from the table when there's a bad deal. And, I know the guy, I know the way he negotiates. The first offer is going to be a bad deal, and we're going to walk away from it.
I know the guy. I know the way he negotiates. The first offer is going to be a bad deal, and we're going to walk away from that deal. Well, the first offer was way back in July of 2025. So what? Is your plan you just walk away and you never go back? What a negotiator you are, Mr. Carney. You are letting Canadians down, and you are breaking the most important promise that you've had in that whole election. How much money have you cost Canadians in that year? How much? How many businesses have closed because of you? How many people have lost their jobs because of you? And what is the risk to the Canadian manufacturing sector? Between 1.4 and 2 million jobs across this country. Because of you. Because of your unwillingness, inability, or incompetence, or maybe all three, to work with the guy that you said you could handle, and that you said you were the one to negotiate a deal with him. What are you going to tell Canadians? So, ladies and gentlemen, the story here is not that the USMCA hasn't been renewed. That's not the story. The story is that there's businesses that have been counting on Mark Carney and the Liberals to incorporate into that agreement these other factors and these other tariffs that have been hammering our industries. Meanwhile, what has Mr. Carney been doing? Well, he's been having a great time at the World Cup. Ladies and gentlemen, if the priorities of Mr. Carney aren't clear now, I don't know what to tell you.